welcome to Behind the Classroom Door. Today's video is going to focus on fractions. We had a request from a parent wanting to know how to recognise and work out basic fractions of numbers and shapes. Let's take a look.
Okay, so fractions. Now fractions are one area that children do often struggle with. The idea of looking at a shape and having to find a fraction of that is quite an abstract idea for a child, so they do often come into problems. Now, the first thing to remember when talking to a child, teaching a child about fractions, is it doesn't matter how the fraction looks. Okay? Half of a shape is always half of a shape regardless of what type of shape it is, how large the shape is. Now with fractions, we must remember that to be a fraction, the parts must always be equal. So with halves, both half must be exactly the same size, okay, or exactly the same number. Now, the easiest way to work out fractions, we count the total number of parts. Now, for example, with a half, you have two sections, okay? So that would be our lower number, okay? So we've got 2 is our overall total amount of pieces when we're thinking about shapes. Now, in each of these instances, one of those parts has been selected, has been coloured in, has been cut away, however you want to distinguish it. Now, that's the easiest way to work out your fraction. Now, the children will then have to just learn to recognise that as a half, and obviously 1 is half of 2. But it is quite a complicated thing for them to hold in their brains and for them to remember. So all of these shapes are a half. Talking to your child about that, getting them to quickly recognise that as a half is really key for them to move on with their understanding of fractions. Okay, so now the same principle. We have here quarters. Again, doesn't matter how the quarter is selected, each section is an equal part and each section is the same size. Now, again, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we know our lower number is going to be 4. That is the total amount of pieces that we have. In each instance, we have selected one part of that fraction. So that gives us 1/4. Now, the term quarter is quite an odd one for the children to work with because they don't often come across it. Sure, we have things like quad to mean 4, but for them to really recognise that, it will take some time, okay? It's not a number that we often work with younger children. So a number like 1/4 being 4 will be problematic, and sometimes they'll say 1/4. We really need to move them towards using the correct mathematical language, so we do refer to it always as a quarter. Now that is the basics for recognising halves and quarters in shapes. Now when it comes to objects and numbers, it can become a little bit more problematic. Now, as you can see on my board, I've got 8 turtles. Okay, so we know our total amount is 8. As a group, as a whole, we have 8. Okay, now objects can be difficult because obviously they're movable, and the children can say, well, there's 1 turtle, 2 turtles, so we need to refer to them as a group, as a whole. Now, certainly for younger children, the easiest way to work with objects and relating it to number is to physically move it. So we know we've got 8, so you can say, well, that's 1 turtle for this person, 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 and so on until we have shared the turtles out equally. Okay? Now physically, you can see that that is the same as a half, and you can even bring it back to our shapes and relate the two together. So we can see that that is a half. If we're working with numbers and trying to find the number that relates as a fraction, we can then count it. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we know that half of 8 is going to equal 4. Okay? Now, they will see that, children will be able to pick that up, but we need to keep bringing it back to the fractions. This is a much younger child that would really be focusing on this side of things. So if your child is really struggling with basic recognition of fractions, try doing this. So if we then move into our quarters, we can straight away already work with what we've got. Okay? We can then straight away bring it back into this idea of how many have we got in each section if we equally share it. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, meaning that 1 that 1/4 is going to equal 2. Okay, now obviously this is quite a simple problem. You can make it more complicated, you can increase the number of objects, you can make the fractions more difficult. But constantly and repeating activities like this will really help to reinforce this idea of what a quarter looks like, what a half looks like. Moving objects, making it a physical activity and discussing the whole time using the mathematical language are key to understanding fractions. And getting a basis in this will really help when moving on to fifths and eighths, etc. as they move up to school. Give it a go.
Hello and welcome back to Behind the Classroom Doors Top Tip. Now, following on from Ben's video on how to find fractions of numbers and shapes, we have a bar of chocolate here. Now, making learning at home fun and tactile is an important thing. So, in order to demonstrate fractions, the use of food is an excellent method. So the first thing I would do is to count with your child how many pieces make up a total whole bar of chocolate. So if they're younger, they might want to count 1 cube at a time using their finger. If they're a little bit older, perhaps using times tables to count. So 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24. 24 pieces of chocolate make a whole bar of chocolate. So the next part is to divide the chocolate bar into 2 equal parts. So for this, all you're going to need to do is split the chocolate into 2 pieces. Now before I do that, I would ask the children, we know there's 24 pieces, so what is half? How many pieces will there be in each section so that it is 2 equal parts? Okay, so our total was 24. Breaking that into half, it would then become 12. So if you snap piece of chocolate, you would then have 2 halves. After that, you can move on to quarters. So we now have 12 pieces in each half. How many pieces would you have in a quarter? Nice easy way to find a quarter. You've got your half it again. So I would then snap the half to make quarters, and the same with the other piece. And if your children know or calculated that there would be 6 pieces of chocolate in a quarter, then you can turn it into a game and they can perhaps eat those pieces of chocolate. I hope that helps.